Well, in Ephesians chapter 2, Paul says that we are being made into a dwelling in which Christ lives by his Spirit. Christ is creating us if we've given him permission, if we've given our lives to him. He is creating us. He already dwells in us. He comes into us the way we are when we accept him. And I love the statement by Max Lucado. Max Lucado says, he accepts you just the way you are. He loves you just the way you are, but he doesn't want to leave you that way. How many have ever bought a house, but knowing when you bought the house, you were going to make some changes to it? Mindy's raising her hand. Every house we've bought has been a fixer-upper. We like the house. We like the floor plan. In fact, when we bought our house here in Yakima, when we moved here to Yakima a few years ago, we went and looked at all these houses, and most of the houses we looked at were these really, really nice houses in nice neighborhoods, and the realtor said, man, this would be a great house for you and your family. And we go out, leave the house, and Mindy say, I really like that house, but I think I'd take that wall out, and I'd do this over here. And I said, then why are we going to buy a beautiful house if we're going to make changes anyway? If we're going to make changes anyway and knock out walls, we might as well take a house that we really don't like the way it is, and then we can do what we want. So once again, we bought a fixer-upper, and we've been knocking out walls and replacing flooring and replacing countertops and doing all that kind of stuff. Jesus takes us, he enters our life the way we are. But he says, will you allow me to make changes? Will you allow me to change this residence to make it the way I want it, to make it where I'm comfortable? John chapter 14, verse 23 is probably kind of where Paul got his thing about Christ being a dwelling, living in us. He had probably read the words of John, which says, anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. This was John quoting Jesus. Anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. My Father will love them and we will come and make our home in them. If you love me, you will keep my commandments, and we will live in you. You will be our dwelling. The concept of Jesus living in us is nothing new. Most of us probably came to Christ partly based on the scripture in Revelation 3:20. Sometime during that process, somebody probably quoted Revelation 3:20, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone opens the door, I will come in and sup with him and he with me. That's probably part of the conversation we came to Christ. Jesus is knocking at the door. Will you open the door? Will you let him in? And most of us are here this morning because we have accepted that invitation. We answered the knock. We opened the door. We said, Jesus, come in. Christ is a gentleman. He won't force himself upon us. He won't force entry into our lives. He knocks and says, I'm here. Will you let me in? And then when we open the door, he comes in and says, thank you for allowing me into your house. Now can I make changes? For a lot of people, that's where it stops. Jesus, come into my life. You can be a guest in my life. You can be here, but leave me alone. Don't tell me what to do with my life. You can be here, but you have to accept me just the way I am, and this is what you're going to live with. A lot of people tell Jesus what areas of their life they can have access to. Here, you can kind of be in charge of this area of my life, but you can't have this part. This is all I'm going to give you. The rest is off limits. These are my own private areas. Don't enter these areas. But once again, Christ is a gentleman. He will never force himself into something in your life that you will not willingly give him. Once he's in our lives, he will begin to knock on the different areas of our lives. He'll say, okay, I'm in your house. Can I come into this room? Can I come into this room? Thank you for inviting me in, but can I remodel this space? Can I help clean out this closet? And we have to be willing to open the door and say, yes, Christ, you can come into this area too. I don't want you just to be a guest. Help me make this place to be a dwelling, a place where you will be happy to live. Christ wants our whole life, not just parts of it. For the past several weeks, we've been imagining that our lives are like homes. We've invited Jesus to enter many of the rooms in our house. We haven't covered them all, but we've covered some of the key areas. And again, some of the rooms we've covered are areas you may not have in your house, because most of you probably don't have a library or a study in your house. We talked about the library or study and what that represents in our spiritual home. We all have a kitchen or dining room. We talked about that one. But we've been imagining our lives are a house, and we've been saying, Jesus, I want you to be in this room too. I don't want you to be a living room only guest. I want you to have full access. So Jesus, come into this room. Look through the cupboards. Open the closets. Help me clean out those things that shouldn't be there. I want you to feel comfortable in this house. We've said, Jesus, you have permission to reorganize, to remodel, to redecorate. Or if necessary, you have permission to demolish this area in my life and start from scratch. We've been praying the prayer that David prayed in Psalm 119. Psalms 139. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Jesus, search me. Turn the spotlight on. I don't want anything, not even a hint. I want nothing that is going to be offensive to you. For the introduction of this series, we looked at a story written by Pastor Robert Munger titled, My Heart, Christ's Home. In that story, Robert Munger did exactly what we've been doing. He invited Christ to enter each room of his heart and allowed Christ to make the changes. He didn't do it all at once. It was a process. And Christ would continually ask, okay, you've given me that part of the house. You've given me that part of the house. Now how about this room? What's behind this door? Can I have this one? And through a process, he slowly began to give other areas of his heart over to Christ. But at the end of the story, after realizing how much better each room was and how much better his life was when he gave full control of that area to Christ, he decided, you know what? I should just give it all to him. Instead of him being a guest in my home, I should just sign my home over to him and give him full reign in every part of my home. So he signed over the deed. He went and got the paper and he signed it over and said, my life is no longer my life. You're not simply living in my home. It is now your home. That's where the first message ended. And that's where we're going to start today. We're going to end where we left off. Today, we're going to talk about signing over the deed of our life to Christ and saying, I am no longer in charge of my own life. You can have my life. You do with me as you please. Part of the American dream is to own something that we can call our own, something that we have full control over. We want to be masters of our own destiny. We want the freedom to make our own decisions without having to ask permission. Years ago, once you bought a piece of property, it really was yours. And you could virtually do anything you wanted to do with it. You could add a room, you could build a second floor, you could put up a new building, you could do anything that you wanted to do because it's your piece of property. And you didn't have to ask somebody permission to do something on your property. It's not quite that easy now. We have these things called building codes, homeowners associations, all these rules and regulations, and now even though it's our property, even though we purchased the home, we can't do whatever we want without getting permission from somebody first. But if we go through the proper channels, we can still make the decisions of what to do in our home. There's still more freedom in owning our own place than living in someone else's home. But there are also some great advantages to not being the owner of the home. I like being able to decide if I want to take a wall out. I love being able to say, you know what, I don't like this color, I'm going to change the color. I like being able to make those decisions myself. But there are times when something happens in the home where I wish I could just call the owner of the home and say, hey, there's a problem here, you need to fix it. There are things like putting a new roof on the house that, it's nice to be able to pick the color of the new roof, but I'd rather be able to call the landlord and say, my roof is leaking. Your responsibility. You fix it. Hey, the hot water tank sprung a leak. I've replaced the hot water tank in my house because it sprung a leak. That was not enjoyable. I did it, but it didn't really change anything. It just gave me a non-leaky tank. I would have liked to have somebody else take care of that. I like making the changes, the things that I do because I decide I want to do them, not simply because they need to be done. When we have a guest in our home, we usually don't expect them to help us with maintenance around the house. How many of you have a guest come into your home and say, oh, I'm sure glad you're here. I had a remodeling project planned for this weekend. You can help me with it. Now, if they're family or if they're really, really close, maybe, they're willing to do that. In fact, maybe they came for that purpose. Last spring, we went to Taylor and Lindsay's house. They were getting ready for Sienna's first birthday party, and there was some cleanup and some repairs. They needed a way to kind of keep the dog in an area away from the people when they come over and stuff. And so we said, hey, we'll come a day early. We will help you. And so we came and helped them clean the yard and get some things ready. But they're family. Family will sometimes do that. But we usually don't expect our guests to help with those kinds of things. We either put them off until they're gone or we try to get them done before they get there. But even if people do help out with something, if it's our house, we're the ones that are deciding what's going to be done. We didn't go and tell Taylor and Lindsay what they were going to do on their house. We said, we're here to help you. What do you want done? And then we helped them in a couple of projects. They said, well, we'd like to have this done, but we're not sure exactly what we're doing. And so they called on Dad, who had the expertise in some of those areas, and I helped them figure out how to build the gate and what kind of materials they needed and stuff. They still paid for the stuff, but I helped them do it. Their house, they were the ones in charge. They were the ones that got to make the decisions. When Christ is a guest in our spiritual homes, He's one of those guests that is always willing to help out if we ask. But He will not force His way in. He won't do it without our permission. He's not the owner. He'll only do what we give Him permission to do. Usually when we're making the decisions over our own lives, they're not the best decisions. How many of you figured that out? We might think they were the best decisions at the time. It sounds good at the time. In fact, it talks about that in Proverbs. It says, there is a way that seems right to a man or a woman, to mankind. There's a way that seems right to a person. We think it's the right thing to do, and then we do it, go, maybe that really wasn't the right thing. They might be okay decisions. Sometimes we do things that were okay. But if we learn to let Christ make the decisions, they're always going to be the best decisions. They're always going to be better decisions than we would come up with on our own. When it comes to our lives, it's better to give the ownership to Christ instead of Him being a guest and simply helping us with the things that we want help with. When Christ has full control, when He makes the decisions and we do what He asks, our lives turn into something that we could not even imagine on our own. Because what does Jeremiah 29:11 say? He has great plans for us. He knows what we need. And when we put Him in control, things always turn out better. But as I've already mentioned, it's not easy to give up control. We want to make the decisions on our own. We don't want somebody else calling the shots. We want Christ to work for us. We want to tell Him what to do with our lives, bring the ideas to Him, and then expect Him to carry it out. Romans 12:1 is our key verse for today. Some of you might know it by heart. If I said Romans 12:1, some of you might be able to tell me what it says. It says, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. Paul says we should give our bodies to Christ as a sacrifice. Everything we've talked about this past few weeks has something to do with our body. We talked about what we watch. We talked about what we think about. We talked about what we do. And even though we've been talking about things in the spiritual realm in our study, our spirit, while we're here on earth, resides where? In our body. As long as we are here on earth, we cannot separate our spirit from our body. Our spirit dwells inside of us. One day, our spirit and our body will separate. When our physical body dies, our spirit will continue to live, will no longer be restricted by this home that still needs to be remodeled. But until then, it lives in our body. That's why it's important to take care of our body and make the right decisions with our body, because our spirit is living inside that body. What we do with our body affects our spirit. If Christ is going to control our spirit, he must also have control of our body. But that goes totally against everything we've taught in society. Because how many have ever heard somebody say, "It's my body. Nobody else can tell me what to do with my body"? You ever heard that? Have you ever said that? Don't answer. You can't tell me. I get to make up my own decisions. Even if they're bad decisions, I'm in control. I need to make the decisions when it concerns my body because it's mine. Well, you know what? It's true. It is your body, and ultimately, you do get to decide what to do with your body. People can make suggestions to you, but you get to decide whether or not you're going to listen to them. Nobody can force you to do something against your will. But Christ wants it to be his body. He says, I want to be in control. I can't force you to give me control. I can't force you. Well, he probably could if he wanted to. But he says, I won't force you to make the right decisions. I will give suggestions. But it's up to you. Will you listen to what I have to say? Will you treat your body the way I would want it to be treated? Will you be careful with the kinds of things that you bring in, the things you watch, the things you hear, the things you do? Will you do them according to my will? If Christ lives in you, he wants all of you. He wants your body, soul, and spirit. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. He wants all of you. Paul instructs us to offer ourselves as a sacrifice. A sacrifice is something that is hard to give. If it was easy, it wouldn't be a sacrifice. He says, offer your bodies as a sacrifice. None of us like to give up control. But if we really want to please God, we have to give up control. We have to give control over to him. A sacrifice is something that can't be taken from us. A sacrifice must be given willingly. If it's taken from us, it's not a sacrifice, it's a theft. Somebody took it against my will. A sacrifice is something we really don't want to give, but I know it's the best, and I'm giving it because it's obedience, and I'm giving it because I know that you're a higher power. It's not what I want to do, but yes, you can have this. God can request it from us, but we have to decide to give it on our own. But I want you to notice that other word. It talks about a sacrifice. He says, give your bodies as a sacrifice. But there's something that comes before that. He says, give yourself as a living sacrifice. What does that mean? It's kind of strange, isn't it? A living sacrifice? I thought sacrifices were dead. Can a sacrifice really live? A living sacrifice is an oxymoron. It's like saying, I have an open secret, or I want the larger half, or the silence is deadening. There are some things in the English language that just don't make sense. This is one of them, a living sacrifice. Those two words are contradictory. The same man, Paul, that said, offer yourselves as a living sacrifice, also said things like, I die daily. And then he says, I have been crucified with Christ. I no longer live. But he didn't stop there. He didn't say, I'm dead. I'm just dead. I cease to exist. I no longer live, but he says, Christ lives in me. I'm dead, but at the same time, I'm more alive than I've ever been because it's no longer my life. It's now his life living through me. I have given possession of myself to him. I'm still living, but I'm living differently because I'm no longer calling the shots. He's calling the shots. Offering ourselves as a sacrifice doesn't mean we stop living. It means we stop being in control. We're still alive, but we're living someone else's life. We're living as Christ. We become Christ is really what it means. We actually become real Christians. And what does that word Christian mean? I talk about it all the time. Christ-like. We are living, but we're not living as ourselves. We are now living as Christ. To be a living sacrifice means that we commit ourselves to God, which means we yield, surrender, and entrust ourselves totally to God. We place ourselves completely at his disposal. But the only problem with a living sacrifice is it can change its mind. Most of us make a decision to follow Christ completely. When we accept him, we have the intentions of giving him our whole life. We don't say, Jesus, come in and just stay in the living room. We don't say that. When we invite him in, our full intent is to give him control. But what happens the next day usually? We say, okay, Jesus, you can still be in control of this room, but there are certain places I'm not willing to give up yet. We take back part of that control. We see, maybe I didn't really think this thing all the way through. And we may not actually come out and say it, but the way we live shows that we haven't really given ourselves totally to Christ. We really haven't made ourselves a complete sacrifice. That's what Paul said when he said, I die daily. Giving God control is not a one-time decision. It's a daily decision. Because I may have promised myself to Christ yesterday, but what am I doing today? Each day I have to get up in the morning and say, Christ, today I make the decision all over again. I don't want to live today for myself. I don't want to make all the decisions. In fact, I don't want to make any of the decisions. I want you to be in control. I sacrifice myself. I die to my own desires. I die to my own thoughts. Jesus, I give myself to you. And actually, Paul, and I know Paul was more spiritual than I am, okay? I give him that. I don't even compare myself to Paul. Paul had to die to himself daily. I have to die to myself hourly, sometimes minutely. I don't know if that's a word. Is that a word, minutely? Paul maybe only had to make the decision once a day. I don't know about you. I've got to make that decision more than once a day. There's a lot of times I look at it, I go, what did you just do? It's kind of like the VA commercials. What did you do? Was that a you decision or was that a Christ decision? And I had to say, Jesus, I'm sorry. I know I gave myself to you. I know I promised you that you could have my life, but I just climbed off the altar. I went back to my old self. And I had to say, Jesus, I'm climbing back on the altar. You can have my life once again. It's not going to be me. It's going to be you living in me. Instead of being in control, we offer Christ control. Instead of our body belonging to us, instead of our eyes belonging to us, and our ears belonging to us, and saying, I can listen to that if I want to, they're my ears. I can watch it if I want to, they're my eyes. We say, Jesus, what would you have me do with your eyes? Is this something you want your eyes to see? Is this something you want your ears to hear? Is this someplace that you want your body to go? Is this something you want your hands to do? Is this something you want your feet to do? I've given my whole self to you. You tell me what to do with this body because it's your temple. You live in it. General William Booth, founder of the Salvation Army, was once asked the secret for why God was using him in such an effective way. How are you able to do all these things that you're doing? And Booth's answer was, other people have greater minds, more talent, and greater resources. But God has gotten all there is of me. There may be people with more talent, with more smarts, but you know what? God can do more through somebody who's not as smart or not as talented, that will give it all to him, than he can with somebody who's got all the intelligence or all the talents in the whole world. He says, will you give? I don't care how much it is that you have, but will you give it to me? Will you let me control it? Charles Stanley made this observation. He said, why do you suppose there are close to 100 million church members in America, and yet they're not making more of a moral and spiritual impact? Have you ever thought about that? As many people as are sitting in our churches on Sunday morning in America, why does the morality of America seem to be going down instead of going up? He goes on, he says, why is it that on Sunday morning, thousands of churches have more empty seats than full? If so many people profess to be Christians, if so many people profess to believe in God, and so many people say, I've given God my life, why are more of them somewhere else this morning than in church, worshiping the one that they say is in charge of their life? Why is it that only 50% of the number that's on the church membership roll in most churches, and I'm not saying that's the case here because a majority of our members come. We are ahead of the averages as far as those who actually say they're members and come. But nationwide, you look at the number of people who say, I belong to that church, or their names are on the membership roll. Less than 50% of those who say that's my church attend on any given Sunday. If Christians really believe in a real heaven and a real hell, how can we be so silent? The answer to these questions is tragically simple. I'm still quoting here. I added a few little commentary on my own, but I'm still quoting Charles Stanley. He says it's very simple. God's people have made a decision about Jesus, but they've never fully made a commitment to him. End quote. Making a decision for Christ is not the same thing as being committed to him. Inviting Jesus to live in our hearts is not the same thing as giving him our hearts. When we give Christ control, we don't stop living. It's when Christ is in control that we actually start living. Yes, we may have to give up some things that we want to do, but Christ will give us back so much more than we've ever given up. How many have realized that? The more you give to him, the more he gives back. And those things that you thought, I can't give these things up, you're not even thinking about those things anymore because he's filled your life with so much better things. You say, why did I even think that was so important? He's filled me with so much more than I ever had before. Truth be told, we shouldn't be given the opportunity to choose. He's generous to even let us choose what to do with our lives. He should be able to just tell us what to do or force us to do it because really we don't belong to ourselves in the first place. We actually belong to him. He's already the rightful owner. I said we're going to talk about signing over the deed. You know what? We really don't need to sign it over. He already owns it. But he allows us to decide whether or not we'll let him control it. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 19 and 20 says, do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. Or look at the person next to you, say, you are not your own. You were bought with a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies, because it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to Him. And if you're not using it for Him, you know what you're actually doing? You're actually robbing from Him because it's His. As His, He should be in control. Our house in California, when we finally sold it, the people that were buying the house, he was in his busy season. He had a season of the year that was busier than other seasons, and they weren't going to have time to move during that time, and he knew we didn't have a place to go anyway, and so he came to us with a proposition. He says, listen, let's go ahead and sign the paperwork. The deed will be transferred over. It'll be my house, but he said, you guys can go ahead and live there until school's out for the spring. That way your kids can still be in the same school district. Nothing has to change. He says, you can live there free of charge, but there are some things I'd like to have done to the house. I like the things that you've done to the house while you've been there, and instead of paying me rent, I want you to remodel the bathrooms. I want you to do these things. Now, it was great. It was a great proposition. The house was no longer ours. It was his, which meant if something happened to the house, if the roof decided to spring a leak, which hopefully it wouldn't because we had already put a new roof on the house, it would no longer be my problem. It would be his problem. I got to continue to do improvements to the house, but I no longer got to decide what those improvements would be. He got to pick the colors. He got to pick the tile. He got to say whether this wall came or went or whatever. And it actually ended up being not just we got to stay there for free. I mean, there was so much he wanted to do the house. He actually figured out what he would have charged us rent. We got the free rent. And he actually paid me money on top of that to fix up his house. But while we're fixing up his house, we also got to live in his house. It was a great situation. We got to make improvements, even though we didn't get to pick what the improvements were, but as the house is improved, we got to enjoy those improvements. That's the way it is when we turn it over to God. Our life doesn't stop getting better. It actually gets better faster. Actually gets better instead of, well, I thought that was going to be better. You guys don't know what I'm talking about. We get to enjoy what He is doing, and we cooperate with Him in turning it into a place that He is happy, and when He's happy, we're happy. Kind of like the old saying, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. You know what? If Christ isn't happy, you're not going to be happy. There are a lot of people pursuing happiness, and they're making all their own decisions, and they're saying, I'm doing all these things that are supposed to bring me joy. I thought this was going to be fun. I thought I was going to enjoy this. Why am I so miserable? You know why you're so miserable? Because He's not happy with what you've created. When He's happy, because we've given Him control, when we're doing things His way, we find true joy. We find the true purpose for life. Christ has already paid the price. We rightfully belong to Him. But owning and possessing are two different things. The gentleman that bought our house in California, he owned the house, but he was not yet possessing the house. He was making the decisions in the house, but he wasn't even living there yet. Owning and possessing are two different things. Christ will not take something from us by force. He waits for us to give it up. He asks, He says, are you ready to turn that one over to me too? Will you give me that? But we have to be willing to give it. I'm going to ask the worship team to come up and get ready here. As long as we want to be in charge, He will allow us to be in charge. It's okay, you want to make the decisions? Okay, fine. I'll only get as involved in your life as you want me to be. I could really make some changes that you would be happy with. I could make your life better, but until you're ready, I'll let you keep living your mediocre life. If we want Him to simply be a guest, He will oblige. If we want to figure things out on our own, if we want to do things on our own, He will sit back and He'll watch. He'll say, fine. I'm here when you want me. But if you want to continue to make mistakes, go ahead. If we want the full blessings of God, If we want to really live, we must place ourselves on the altar. We must say, it's no longer my life. It's your life. Jesus said, I have come that they might have life. He hasn't come to kill us. He's come to give us true life. I have come that they might really have life. They think they have life now. I've come that they can really have life. But not just normal life, not just mediocre life. I have come to give them abundant life, great life, life overflowing. We all want that overflowing life. We all want that abundant life. But we can't have that abundant life apart from Christ. We can't have that abundant life when we're making the decisions. We can't have that abundant life when we're telling Him how we're going to run our life. It only comes when we say, Christ, it's no longer my life. You're in charge. You tell me what to do with my hands. You tell me what to do with my feet. You're in charge of my activities. Jesus, it's no longer my money. I got a lot of things I'd like to do with my money. But Jesus, it's not my money. It's your money. So before I spend it, I'm going to ask you. I mean, I'd like to do this and I'd like to do that, but Jesus, what do you want me to do? I'm giving everything that I have to you. It belongs to you anyway. I'm just recognizing that it belongs to you. And I'm letting you be in charge. Maybe you're here this morning and you never even answered that initial knock on the door. He's been knocking saying, can I come in? Maybe this morning you're ready to let Him come in. But I encourage you, if you're going to let Him come in, right from day one, say, you can have control. Maybe you're here, you've let Him come in, but you've still been telling Him what you're going to do with your life. Jesus, you can live in me, but you can't live through me. You can be there when I have a problem, and I'll come to you. But don't tell me how to live my daily life. Don't tell me what I can and cannot do. I'm going to keep control. Maybe you're ready this morning to turn it all over to Christ. Say, Christ, I no longer want you to be simply a resident in my life. I want you to be my life. It's your house, not mine. You do with me as you please. I will listen to your voice, and I will do only what you ask me to do.